You're welcome. I'm here, and I know that's all you need. Today, I am going to talk about woke. My name is Skeptical Spectrum. I am the son and/or daughter of Miriam and Mayhem Skeptic. No, that Spectrum. My last name Spectrum. I have to talk to you about woke, and that is because it's almost midnight, and I'm literally just woke up from the couch, was about to go to bed, and realized I needed to make a video. You need to stop making any bad thing out of woke ever. Just be a purist. Don't be an ass. Just realize woke is a good thing. It's a normal thing. It's not even a thing, by the way. It's a freaking word. And what it is a conjugation of the family of words like wake, awaken. That's it. I get waking. You know what I mean, right? So it's the word woke, right? Like everybody really knows what it means. Okay. It means to pay attention. Why does it mean to pay attention? To pay attention, not just like in some weird metaphorical way. It has a little bit to do with African American English, and I believe it was Leadbelly that like used the first documented public um, use of that word. He had done. He. I know that my reasoning's a little shaky here. um, he was done with like a show at some venue, and the crowd was there, and I think it was a largely African American crowd, and there may have been some political issues going on or some bad crap happening to black people going on that day or something. Probably was because it probably always is. And when he was done with the concert, he said, "Good night, everybody. Best stay woke." Something like that. He might have not said good night, everybody. He might have said, "Have a crappy night, everybody. Best stay woke." But the point is, he said, "Best stay woke." You know, and woke again. It's like I don't know. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is, don't be stupid and say that being alert um, is a bad thing, that paying attention is a bad thing. You might say that someone's claiming they're paying attention or that someone is claiming falsely that they are alert, but that's not the point. The point is, if they are alert and if they are paying attention, you can't be against that. And so when someone uses the word woke and they promote the concept of being woke, that means you are paying attention. And if you are paying attention, you're going to see that there has been immense racism in this country. And it is like the kind where they brutalized and mangled people. I just listened to a history expert talk about some guy being forced to eat his own genitals before they like threw him in a river to drown him or killed him in some other way. Okay. That's the kind of stuff that happens. It happened in the past. Things like that happen in the present. I don't know about that kind of exact act, but people are routinely brutalized because they're the most vulnerable, you know. Like we use things like crime to go after African Americans. And how'd that happen? Well, I think the evolution of that was like this, right? So this is Jim just sort of making this up from, you know, listening to people and watching documentaries and reading history and stuff like that. This is my impression, right? And that is that people that were African American came here merely to be forced into back-breaking, body-breaking, soul-breaking labor for the behest of people who were just not doing their fair share. They were hurting people. They were um, ruining lives. They were destroying cultural heritage. Anyway, yet these people survived. And that kind of oh yeah, this is my evolution here. So when slavery was abolished, um, formerly enslaved people had to figure out how to make a life from scratch, and they did it. They did it despite the ongoing continual brutalization and hangings and lynchings and the kind of body mutilation while you're still alive type of stuff I just described a second ago. I mean, that stuff happened and happened and happened again. So, despite the belligerence of the dominant white society continuing to this day, because the dominant white society is still killing, brutalizing, and mutilating black bodies. Well, they wound up finding neighborhoods to live in, maybe being forced into certain neighborhoods. That's why they call them ghettos, because it was similar to the Warsaw Ghetto, where you push someone in so you can keep track of all of them, right? So then what happens? Well, we got this thing in our country called law enforcement. And who does that? The police. Well, do the police go in to the black neighborhoods and on a more than regular or enough of a basis go in and say, "Hey, we're just here to help. How's everything going?" No, they went to knock on their doors and ask, "What are you doing wrong?" They went to pull them over and said, "What are you doing wrong?" They provided all kinds of jails to lock them up again and enslave them again through the prison industrial complex. And so when you go to a neighborhood that's predominantly black, I don't think it's reasonable to think that they're going to be reasonable to think that the police are there to help them. They're going to believe the truth that the police were mostly there to hurt them. And in many ways, because of the way our society works, I think they're often there to hurt them. Whether they're the nicest guys in the world and they don't even realize what they're doing, or gals, because a lot of people are cops now, and I think it's wonderful. But they had to develop their own economy and their own protection, their own form of regulating their neighborhoods. So they start to organize with each other. And neighborhoods are, organized differently by the people who live there than by what somebody's drawn a city line or a neighborhood line. And um, people in the neighborhoods have to organize a leadership structure because there's nobody, all the leadership outside is going to come in just to hurt them and steal from them and beat them up and put them back into forced labor. They have to learn to create and enforce rules. So they form gangs. And this is not unusual for people to form gangs. It's a common thing. I think gangs was a huge kind of romanticized things when it was supposedly the various forms of underworld crime on a larger scale with what I guess were not considered non-black immigrants and that kind of thing. Um, so the mafia, and then you have this kind of mafia and that kind of mafia and all that stuff, right? And they did it, and yes, it was brutal and mean and horrible. But they probably did it for similar reasons because of freaking ethnic prejudice forces people to create their own systems within the United States, within their states, within the cities that they live in. So African Americans, just like everyone else, had to create some structure and government within their neighborhoods. This is my guess. And that is what gangs were. And then gangs would bump into gangs and then have to settle things through probably negotiating, probably threatening, and then sometimes, plenty of times through violence. And yeah, it got ugly, but it didn't get uglier than how the police brutalized them and the system brutalized them, and how the system had stolen years of wealth away from them. I mean, I would say decades, centuries. Because, like I said in my last video, there was probably generational wealth wealth in many places in Africa. Of course there were. There were tribes, and there was royalty, and there were landowners, and there were non-landowners, and there were ways of managing those economies. And we just ripped them out of there. Um, and yeah, again, I'm going to reiterate that yes, so some people on the African continent sold other people from the African continents because back in the day, probably they were very much like small tribal. Like you could in America, like there's this tribalism that says the US is the best. Well, back then the tribes were smaller. That's how we came out. That's how humans developed from tribal stuff, in small numbers of groups, right? So they were selling people that were not their people in their view. Okay. Um, and and so we just can't do a false equivalence between what they did and what we did. What we did was the first ever true chattel slavery, where people were branded in our minds, like actually literally we define them as born to be slaves, born to be like cows and horses and goats and donkeys and mules. So that's what we did. And then we just kept doing it and kept doing it, even when they got their own um, neighborhoods, even when they earned their own towns, opened their own towns, created their own municipalities, and successfully self-led them. What would we do? We went into Homestead and we just burned it to the ground and made everybody there scatter because claimed without any evidence that she was gone a little longer than she should have been because some, oh yeah, black guy raped me. That's what happened. There's a lot of alternative stories to what really she made her not be at home or whatever. Um, so um, uh, so here's the point. Woke means remain alert. And if you find yourself lapsing into, well, like, A- African Americans this country, African Americans in this country, well, they're not doing themselves any favor to think for a minute until you get alert again. And you realize this is the sabotage of an entire people that you're engaging in, maybe not even aware that you're doing it. If you're trying to find like the smooth edges of racism and slavery and Jim Crow, and people's houses being bombed, and a boy getting killed because he whistled at a white woman, you've nodded off. You're asleep. You're not quite there. You're not quite all there. You're not paying attention. So when you hear anyone criticizing the word woke or the concept of woke, realize that they're lapsing. They're not necessarily bad people. Some of them have on top of them a fierce rage that someone wants to climb up the scale to their level because they already feel like they're on the second rung down on at the bottom of the bottom, the second bottom rung on the ladder, the second to the bottom. And they don't want anybody climbing up to their level. And that distracts them. That messes with their thinking. It scrambles the brain. So whenever you're noticing somebody having a problem with the concept of staying woke, or if you ever notice yourself having the problem with the concept of staying woke, realize you're willingly putting yourself to sleep. and quickly get out of it by any means you can think of. Because sometimes when you put something to sleep, it doesn't ever get back up again. That's a brilliant ending. I'm just gonna end right there. I love it. I love me. I like you guys, but I love me.